don't quit people they're loyal to. They quit nameless, faceless organizations.
It's easier to hide in a remote work environment than it is in person. But
Yep.
don't get me wrong, there's plenty of lazy people in person that are pretending to work. So if you don't have your measurements, you don't have a ruler for that position, you're in a bad spot no matter which route you decide to go.
I've done remote work back as far as the 1990s. Remote work, and how
You're faxing it in, huh?
Right? How did you? Hey there, I'm Jeff Cordes, and welcome to the C.R.A.P Leadership Podcast. My philosophy is about C.R.A.P: caring, respect, appreciation, and praise.
And this is Randy Walensky. Been a speaker, trainer, sales professional, and coach for over 10 years, using all of Jeff's C.R.A.P. And we want to bring these principles to you in your organization. Let's jump in. All right, today we are talking about a contentious topic. Everybody's got an opinion: remote work or return to work. Be in the office, be remote, be hybrid. Everybody's across the board. Everybody's holding up their banners ready to charge and tell everyone else what they should be doing. This is a mess of a topic, but it's super important. So Jeff and I, we're going to untangle this bad boy today and hopefully deliver a few things.
Or maybe tangle it up even a little more. I mean, why don't we just throw a hand grenade in the room when you start talking about a topic like this? Because, I mean, there are a lot of strong opinions, and there's ideas that may work, may not. And we're going to explore those things today because I think you have to explore it. And Randy and I have some real sound tips for you today. But it's a nightmare. I mean, I know I've got clients that they've struggled with this question because some people are working remote and others aren't, and some people are saying, "Well, why do they get to work remote and I don't?" And you either have it together or you don't. At least that's what I've seen.
I think you're right, Jeff. I think a lot of organizations are just trying to feel their way through this. They don't know what's right. There's competing motivations. And I think one of the biggest motivations could potentially be they see a drop in productivity. And rather than analyze anything else that could have changed, they're just like, it's got to be this. I got to be watching them. I got to see them working to know that those buttons are getting clicked. And let's be honest, there's been a lot of lazy, ridiculous people with their mouse jigglers to make it look like they're working. Although I have
they go on Facebook and Spotify and do all those crazy things. If you're going to do things like that, just stay off all those social media platforms. That's crazy.
There's plenty of people that we're working two jobs. I remember especially when the pandemic was running strong and everybody was remote, people were like, we had to fire this guy because we found out he was working a second job. So there's kind of guilt on all sides. And one way to just say, we don't care about all that. We're going to throw that hand grenade in the room, like you said, and that's the return to work. And we're going to let's start untangling this, Jeff, because there are reasons on both sides. There's motivations that make sense in all areas. Right. So what is it? Remote? Is it hybrid? Or is it going to be return to work?
Well, I will tell you that I've done remote work back as far as the 1990s. And people say, well, what do you mean you do remote work? And, how
you're faxing it in, huh?
Right. How did you manage that? We didn't have Zoom and we didn't have all these other technological features, but I was always an advocate of having our sales force working out of their house, because instead of being in the office where they get sucked into meetings and waste a lot of time, I wanted those salespeople out on the road, talking to customers, filling in their CRM, doing those sorts of things without interruption, because we got more productivity out of those folks. And the advantage is you could measure in sales. One of the advantages is you can measure someone's either getting it done or they're not getting it done. And that's, I think, an important feature of this whole thing is being able to measure things. And so I've seen remote work 35 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it still works to this day, depending on the job.
You make it a good point, especially when your work is something that's so easily measurable and so easily trackable as sales. It's the easiest meritocracy there is. Did you hit your numbers or didn't you hit your numbers? And there's no way to hide. And that's all that they really care about from a salesperson, right? Whereas different roles might have different metrics and are harder to track. And so I think that's where people get a little, we want all of our, maybe our support people to be in. However, on the same other point, I was listening to a gentleman who said when he compared his remote workers to his in-house salespeople, and again, these are mostly sales calls. So I think you might be talking about, Jeff, like going and seeing customers, which 100%. There's some sales roles that you need.
Being on the phone, you
Yeah,
know,
being on the
setting
phone
up
versus being in
meetings and those
person.
sorts of things.
But he said his people who were on the phone who worked remote were much lower paid than his in-house team that called, like by far. And I think that was because of the culture, because of the community. And his opinion was that you can't get up to speed working at home for by yourself, hanging out there. When you're in a culture and there's kind of that pressure of people, you perform. So I could see it being both ways, even in a sales role. But then if your sales role is being out in person, get in your car and hit all the different people and shake hands and kiss babies, because that's how you drive sales in that role. So it probably again depends on the role, the culture, how much accountability.
Yes,
If you're just sitting in your house and you're hanging out and you're throwing in a load of laundry and making a sandwich and flipping through social media,
well,
you're
that
not
never
going to be.
happens.
Yes, and you could tell me, just to ping this back to you, Jeff. You were working remote. When did you first start your own business and you were working remote? Because you shared with me the challenges even for yourself, who's a military guy, who's what we see as a disciplined guy. What was that like?
Well, I started working remote about 15 years ago, and I work out of my house, and I did that. And again, what was the rationale? I could have had a remote office, an office where it wasn't at the home, but I said, well, I didn't want to have to pay that monthly lease every month. And so I thought through and said, well, does it make sense to be in my house working as opposed to renting some space? But the one advantage I had is I didn't have to deal with cultural issues.
Mm,
I mean, I think eh, the plus side of having people in the office, no matter whether it's hybrid or all the time, I think it fosters culture. You have interaction, you have more camaraderie. People are at the coffee machine and they're talking, and I know a lot of organizations have spaces set aside where those spaces are designed for collaboration.
mm,
Sometimes they're in conjunction with the coffee pot. As a matter of fact, my last organization I worked for was a software development firm,
mm,
and this is before the days of remote work. And as an HR person, I used to love to hang out by the coffee pot because that's when I got a chance to interact with people and see how they were doing, and that was my way of being visible. And then people would sit in an area that with couches and things like that, and invariably their conversations turned to work, and they
mm,
started
mm.
brainstorming and throwing out ideas. And I think you lose some of that when everybody's working remote. That's my impression.
You're 100% right about that, in that you can easily have silos when you don't humanize the other people. And when you're sitting around with coffee or water or donuts or whatever the heck you're doing, if it's work focused, if it's a little more casual, you start building relationships. Now they go to lunch together. Now they do things. There's a lot of very big positives that happen organically and by accident. Think of any time you've ever been to any company retreat. I've been to them, spent 8 hours in seminars and talking and this and that. You know where the real magic happens? The little cocktail hour after, the 2 hours dinner, and then having some drinks after before you go back and repeat it. It
Right.
wasn't all the forced organized learning and training. It was the interaction one on one, because it breaks down silos. It allows people to see the humanity, and it allows people to collaborate, and about a million other things that have to do with camaraderie, which are big factors in keeping people in your organization.
Well, and we talked about that in our get-togethers
Yeah.
podcast. I believe it was a week ago, and that interaction, getting to know people, that helps from an employee retention perspective because what happens is once you have that camaraderie, you might not have the greatest boss, but if you've got a great team around you,
Yes.
people don't want to quit the team.
Yes.
There's factors that help in employee retention there. I think that's
Mhm.
very, very important, and you can't minimize that sort of thing.
Mhm.
That's why I'm seeing more and more, at least with my clients, they're in if it makes sense based on the role and the needs of the organization, more and more of my clients are going to a hybrid
Yeah.
because there's an advantage because the other thing is when someone's working out of the house, assuming they have some discipline, if they, well, I have to say that, assuming they got some
Oh,
discipline, working 1 day a week out of the house enables them to really work on projects
mhm.
and things that there may be too many interruptions in the office. I mean, I can tell you as an HR leader, I didn't do any project work when I was at work. I was interacting with people, I was talking with people, I was solving problems, and I did my project work in the evenings and on the weekends.
Mhm.
And if I could have had, and back in those days, we didn't have the option to stay at home and work. It was unthought of.
Yeah. 100%. Well, you're making the point that the hybrid, I think, is where a lot of people are settling. You had kind of a couple things going on. Everybody was forcibly kind of remote work if they could be, or they were working in person and nothing changed for them. But remote workers were remote, and we did that for a long time. And then we got to this kind of, well, let's come back a couple days. And then it kind of went all the way to everybody's got to be back in 5 days a week. Those are the buckets. There's a big segment of that hybrid that can work for so many people where you don't have interruptions. You can stay focused on your work, but you can still schedule things to have collaboration and to meet with people and to build camaraderie. So I think
Right,
hybrid is the winner unless there's a big business case for one or the other. It
right.
really depends. It depends on the organization, but hybrid seems to be the winner for people. And even you could have 2 days a week out of the office and still really get that. If you're in the office 1 day a week, probably might as well be remote. Like, what is that? What is that good for? You know?
Well, and that would be one of my first takeaways for today is you have to is look at the role, look at other factors like employee retention, culture, all those things, and based on those factors, make a rational decision. Don't just do a blanket in or out or whatever. Look at the role. Does it make sense? Can you justify it? Because you will get people saying, well, how come they get to work from home and I don't? Those
Mhm.
sorts of things. You got to be able to explain that. That's part of being transparent in
Mhm.
this whole process. So that would be my first takeaway for today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, is that don't do anything arbitrary. Don't look at it and go, "Man, we're paying $27 a square foot and there's nobody here. Get them back in the office. I'm tired of this," right? You
Right.
can't make a decision. It should be what's gonna have the best performance, what's gonna have the best retention, best results. Think of all the different factors that you have and then say, "Where should
Organization
these people be?"
that you can really benefit the organization, and they can also benefit people as well. I mean, uh,
Should.
let's face it. Yeah, and there's times that you have to look and say, well, can I find this person in my geographical area?
Mm,
I mean, that's a huge one because I don't know if I've talked about it, but I'm also a headhunter. I do search work as part of my business, and I work with clients that have said, we'd love to get somebody where they can be in the office, but we can't find somebody in this geographic region. We'll open it up to remote, and
mhm.
that's a huge plus to remote work that you can take and expand your labor pool exponentially. As long
Definitely.
as you can make it work for that particular role. But I had a client that told me that, "Look, we've got to open this thing up to remote because I can't find someone in my geographic area that has the skill sets that I need." So,
Mhm.
I mean, that would be takeaway number 2, as far as I'm concerned, is don't rule out remote work because it can open up your labor pool.
Expands your labor pool is a good thing. We talked about recruiting versus retention as one of our first ones. It's great for recruiting. It makes, of course, right? You can get the
Absolutely.
whole country. The other thing is retention. So I was just reading a study. It was in Harvard Business Review. They took like 1,600 employees. They split them up into two groups: 5 days a week in the office, hybrid. They had a 30% retention rate go up in the hybrid group. So if you want to retain your people, you want to also think about that. And that's good for the business. That saves millions of dollars. People don't calculate the cost of retention nearly enough. But in this company, because it's so big, it literally
Right.
accounted for about millions and millions of dollars because they were assuming whatever they were making for their salary, you lose them, costs the business about 50% of their salary. which I don't think is high. I think 40% is on the low end, 50% is right in the middle. Some people even think it costs higher to the organization every time you
Well,
lose someone.
when I work with clients on employee retention, I calculate it at 25% salary. I'm extremely conservative in that respect, and you would not believe how astronomical some of the numbers are. I mean, and many organizations don't even know what their numbers are. Well, so again, that goes back to you have to know what it's costing the business or what it's the money that it's making the business. That's the key, and use that rationale on every specific position.
Mhm. Well, and probably one of the last things that we want to talk about as far as a point to make and that we can cover is measuring results. I think the
Yep.
biggest motivator for return to work is people saw a drop in the productivity. And I know that a lot of the people who are pro work remote just want to throw their hands up and go, these people are ridiculous. I can't even believe it. There's probably a little bit of truth in that because it is hard for people to stay focused in their home environment,
Right.
oh, maybe I should go pick up the kids. Whereas if you were at the office, you'd be like, oh, I've got to get someone else to do that. So a lot of times they're putting other priorities over work, which you could say maybe that's good. Maybe that is going to give them more work life balance and maybe it's going to allow them to be in, but maybe it's affecting business too much. So you have to be able to measure because I think everybody should agree that if they're getting all their stuff in their life done and all their work done and their results are better than other people, nobody should be bothering them. That's what another big aspect. People want autonomy. And if they can be responsible and they can perform, let them work remote. But if we're not getting productivity, then whose fault is it? So you have to be able to
Right.
goes back to that point. And that's a tricky one. That's very tricky because I think a lot of times one of the biggest aspects is managers don't even know how to measure or lead. And so
Right.
the default thing is they just want to use their eyeballs to go, they're clicking their keyboard or they're on their phone. I guess they're working as hard as they possibly can. And that's their only metrics they have. That's not a good metric. So
And,
what
and,
else they be
and
using?
you gotta establish these metrics because I think that's probably point number three that I want to emphasize today is that you really have to be able to measure results and measure productivity. If you can't do that, then that's a gap in your thought process as to whether or not you should be having people work remote or not.
Mhm.
So that would be number three. You got to be able to measure results and you got to be able to measure productivity.
And so you got to pick what it is. I mean, everybody who works in a job, if they don't take the time, even if you had everybody working in the office, you should know exactly what the key performance indicators are for that role. If it's
Right.
customer service, it might be call time. It might be customer score. It might be how many issues they're resolving in a given time. You got to figure those out. That one's easy. Sales is easy. But what if it's like some other general area of like how many contracts you got done for your legal department, right? That's kind of a stickier, harder to figure out.
Right.
Whatever it is, you got to figure out what it
You
is
got to
because
go through
otherwise
that
people hide.
exercise.
Well,
Yeah.
people will hide. It's easier to hide in a remote work environment than it is in person. But
Yep.
don't get me wrong, there's plenty of lazy people in person that are pretending to work. So if you don't have your measurements, you don't have a ruler for that position, you're in a bad spot no matter which route you decide to go for their work environment.
Right. And when you start talking about remote work, one of the problems is a lot of leaders don't know how to manage a remote environment. You know, and because I always talk about when I'm doing employee retention, I talk about visibility is paramount. Well, you got to be visible from a technological standpoint. There's different. You have to drive your visibility in different ways, and a lot of managers have never been taught that in a remote setting. So then, in fact, what happens is their people go leaderless, uh,
Mhm.
and there's no guidance. There's no interaction, and that can be detrimental to the organization as well. So again, that's another sticky wicket that we have out there. If for those of you who are from the United Kingdom, you got to be able to measure stuff. You got to be visible. Those things are paramount.
Well, and you've taught me this, Jeff, and you can probably quote it better. Let me just make a mess of it and you correct me. It's like visibility is so important because it drives communication. Hold on, let me say that.
Yeah, let's see if you
Communication
get it
drives
right.
loyalty, and loyalty drives trust. Did I mess it up? No,
No,
it
no,
drives trust, and it drives loyalty.
visibility. Visibility drives communication. Communication
Communication
drives
drives
trust, and trust drives
loyalty.
loyalty.
There we go.
People don't quit people they're loyal to. They quit nameless, faceless organizations, and that's where the leader is paramount, and particularly in a remote setting. The leader's
Yes.
got to be visible from a technological perspective.
So what does that mean? That might mean having more one-on-ones, more quick meetings, more check-ins, because you would accidentally do that if you were in the office. But you have
Right?
to engineer, plan it, put it on your calendar in a virtual environment, or it'll just all be forgotten. And some of
Be
those meetings,
very
some
intentional about it.
Yes, and some of those meetings don't have to be goal oriented. They can be goal less because that is also the time that you get to know people. You can bring all of the team in and just have a conversation, have coffee at lunch, have cocktails after 5, whatever the thing is, you have to do that. And I can definitely say that those little things that you can easily overlook make a huge difference in a remote first environment, getting people together, even if it's on Teams or Zoom or screens, whatever. It's way better than being isolated, never seeing anyone on your team. All right,
Right?
Jeff. So let's bring it in for a landing. You want to hit the 3 points?
Yeah. The first one is if done right, remote work can work. I've seen remote work 30 years ago. The second one is you have to be able to measure results and productivity. And the last one is you have to it opens up your labor pool. Keep that in mind. Remote work does. And then I think the last one, and you kind of brought it up, is
I-
the visibility. Right? I mean, why don't you?
Okay.
That's the last point. Go ahead and elaborate
No,
on that.
that's great. The visibility is another good point. Let's call that point number 4 is be extremely visible with your employees when you're in remote because it's easy for everybody to hide, even the leader just putting their head down and working, and the employees can get lost. So visibility is key. Let me add one more bonus. Now you got 5. You usually get 3. Now you get 5.
Now you're confusing me.
Yeah, I know. The last point that I want to make for people is this should make business sense for everyone. And what does that mean? It means whichever path you choose, it shouldn't just be, well, we're trying to make this person happy, or we're trying to fill our office, or we're trying to do this. It should make business sense. And keeping your people, having them happy, having them productive is good for the business. And if it's good for the business, then make the decision based on that, not just people saying what they want and why. And if you have to make a change, which is unpopular, like more return to work days or something like that, make sure it makes sense and it's good for the business and good for the employees. So if it's good for everybody, then do it. And if it's not, and it's just some weird arbitrary thing because you don't want to invest in your training, rethink that and invest in your training to teach
Absolutely.
your managers how to lead people in some remote environments before you make everybody come back. I'll call that the special bonus one. So that's it for me today. That's it for Jeff, I think, today. What do we got, Jeff? That's it?
Last thing I want to say, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the channel. We're on every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time.
Mhm.
So jump in. We'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, because we're not perfect, and we want to make sure that we're working towards perfection,
There we
and you can really help in that endeavor. So subscribe, like us, and on that note, I'll say, remember, give your employees crap. Why? Because crap works. I'm Jeff Cordes.
I'm Randy Walensky.
Take care.